Welcome everyone to Past and Present with Allison Gilbert and her guests. My name is Andrew Engel and I am Senior Programmer at Reimagine. Our mission is to help people of all backgrounds to face adversity, loss, and mortality and channel the hard parts of life into meaningful action and growth. I'd like to thank For Grief for their support of this series, especially Christina Sirio. And before we begin, I want to offer just a few Zoom tips, actually only one Zoom tip. You'll notice at the bottom of your screen, the CC button, that is a live transcription. And for those who need it, you can activate that. Thank you. The majority of us are Zooming in from the United States, also known as Turtle Island by Native Americans and their allies. Allison and I are in Lenapehoking, the area that covers the New York metro area. Please tell us where you are. And if you're curious about the Indigenous territory where you're located, you can check it out at native-land.ca. And I want you all to mark your calendars for the next Past and Present with Allison. Her guests will be writers Tembi Locke and Jenny Lisk. The topic is widowhood. And both guests have written compelling memoirs about losing a spouse, and it's on June 30th. And now, it's my pleasure to introduce Allison. Allison Gilbert is the author of numerous books, including the forthcoming biography of Hearst newspaper columnist Elsie Robinson, to be published by Basic Books Hachette in September. Her most recent book, Past and Present, Keeping Memories of Loved Ones Alive, reveals creative ways to remember family and friends we never want to forget. You can follow Allison on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. Christina will be posting the handles in the chat, and she's everywhere as A. Gilbert Writer. And with that, it's my pleasure to introduce Allison Gilbert.
Hey everybody, it is my favorite time of the month, which is the last Thursday, because I get to come back and be with you in community. It feels even more meaningful to me today for a bunch of reasons. One is that we are joined by Kathryn Tuggle and Jean Chatzky, who have written together with the entire Her Money team this incredible book called How to Money. I love it. I was honored to be at their book launch in New York City, a very exciting event at Barnes & Noble, huge crowd. People were clamoring for their book. We will talk about it, but let me first say hello to Jean Chatzky and Kathryn Tuggle. So just say hello real quick, and then I'll do a proper introduction.
Hey, everybody. Good to be with you guys.
Hi, thank you guys so much for being here. We're so excited.
So in my social media posts in the last few hours, I admitted that I was unsure if we should be actually offering this event today. It felt a little bit nerve-wracking to me, given the events that we have all seen and witnessed and heard about unfolding in Texas. So what I would like to do, and what I promised to do, which I would feel very comforted by myself, is to just take a few seconds together in community to pause. I will not take very long, I promise, because I know you all want to hear from our guests. But it just feels appropriate to just pause for a beat, because I know we are all so busy and we're carving out this time to be together. So if we can just close our eyes or look out the window and just be together and feel each other's presence just for a moment, and think about those people, those children, of course, and teachers who have lost their lives in Texas. Thank you guys so much. I appreciate that. I know I needed to not just keep being busy, which I find to be very easy for me to do, is to consume my days with work. So thank you for just pausing just for a moment. In Andy's introduction, you also probably heard something a little bit different if you are a habitual joiner of these past and present conversations. You will have no doubt noticed that Domani for Grief is now For Grief. The branding transition is underway. It is happening. All the channels have been changed and updated. The website is morphing and transitioning. There'll be new and exciting things being added to the For Grief platform as we move forward. But I wanted to at least acknowledge the fact that it might have heard and sounded a little bit differently to you this week, this month. So let's start with this incredible book. I love it. And by the way, my son just graduated college, and I think it's a great graduation gift, whether or not your child, your niece, your nephew, your grandchild is graduating high school or college. I think it is a fantastic gift. So Jean, I of course want to start with you, if you don't mind. Kathryn, how did you decide to come up with this book? How did you and Kathryn together decide to come up with this book? You have written many books before, but this audience is very particular. It's not for the adult reader. Help us understand what this book is all about.
Sure. This book is the book that we really wish we had when we were coming out of high school, or particularly for me coming out of college. I think thanks to the pandemic, and if there has been any sort of a silver lining to the pandemic, one sliver of it is that we're having a more serious conversation about the need for financial education than we have had before in this country. We're seeing more states mandate financial literacy education, more states say that it has to be something that you go through before you can actually graduate, and that's fantastic news. But right now, most of the adults in this country don't come out of college or high school equipped to manage the basic things we have to do every single day, week, month, year when it comes to our finances. And it's not that hard. It's just you need a particular list of skills to be able to do these things, and then do them again and again and again on repeat for the rest of your adult life. And so that's what this book is. This book is an instruction manual for how to money. I mean, we believe at Her Money that money is the tool that we all need to know how to use in order to get what we want out of life. It's not the be all and end all by itself. It's this important tool, but you need some instruction on how to use it.
What I appreciate so much about what you bring to the table, and why I'm going to be informal with your bio and Kathryn's bio, is that, of course, everyone knows you, Jean, from your years on the Today Show, from your past books that I have mentioned, in addition to, of course, How to Money. But your partner in crime, Kathryn Tuggle, is no slouch. As the editor-in-chief of Her Money Media, I am duly impressed. When I heard you, Kathryn, at Barnes & Noble talking about the book, duly impressed. I am a huge listener, fan. I'm a fangirl of the Her Money podcast. And of course, Kathryn, you are always on the podcast in the mailbag section, which I love. So in terms of your street cred, Kathryn, you came up with chapters with Jean, with the entire Her Money team. And there are chapters here of how to earn money, how to save money, how to smartly spend money. And I'm curious, from your vantage point, what is the most essential takeaway for young people who are navigating their finances? Is there one for you that bubbles to the top more than the others?
Yeah, well, it's a great question, because the reason we wrote the book in large part is because I think so many of us get financial advice coming at us from all angles. You talk to your mom, she's got her best piece. You talk to your dad, he's got his best piece. Aunts, uncles, everybody's going to tell you a few things when you're growing up about your money. And I think it's hard to know like where they lie in the hierarchy of needs and how important each thing is. So I think that's why we started the book with the chapter on Earn It, about how to get money, because before you can save it and invest it, you have to earn it. And I think the part that I wish I had the most at that age is our section on salary negotiation. Because we know that starting salary, particularly for young women who earn less than men over the course of their lives, that starting salary is so important. Particularly a lot of us are in jobs where the company will give you your raises based on a % of your salary. So if you your starting salary has everything to do with what your salary is going to be in 3 years, in 5 years, in 10 years. So putting that up front in the book was really important to me, as was the chapter on budgeting and spending smarter, because I grew up, in rural Alabama, growing our own food, shopping at thrift stores, but not everybody has that upbringing. I'm an outlier here in New York City for some of my experiences. So, I would say the career stuff and then some of the down home truths about just doing all that you can to keep your spending low.
One part of my reasoning for wanting to keep our scheduled conversation today is that in all of my research and reporting about grief and loss, there is a statistic that I instantly thought of when I first heard about what was unfolding in Texas. And it's because I was a former board member of the National Alliance for Children's Grief that I knew where to find the data. But I'm going to look down at my notes so I don't get it wrong. That an estimated 5.6 million children in the United States will experience the death of a parent or sibling by the time they are 18. And what that translates into, according to the data, 1 in 13 children will then have lost a parent or sibling in the United States by the time they're 18. So when I heard the news of Texas, and I heard the Sandy Hook parents coming out to talk to the media again, I was reflecting on their surviving siblings. And so because How to Money is geared towards younger people, I thought of those kids who are vulnerable, and what they do with their futures when the ground moves beneath their feet in the most horrific way when you lose a sibling. So what are the financial lessons? If you're thinking about mortality from such a young age and you're growing up with that on your mind, I would imagine there is a way to take that fear and make yourself a better planner for your future, which includes love and relationships and your financial well-being. So my question, Jean, to you is, how do you think teens and young adults who read How to Money, how can they prepare best if they're thinking about mortality, thinking about their parents? What can they do now as young people to be stronger?
It's a boy, I mean, Allison, we could just unpack that question for the next hour and not move on to anything else, because I think that grief and loss and fear actually don't bring out the best in us as managers of our own money, in a number of different ways. When we're thinking about fear and about risk, if you've experienced a loss early in life, it can lead you to go in one of two directions, right? It can make you incredibly risk averse, It can make you not want to take the risks that you have to take with your investments in the future. Or it can do the opposite. It can make you take all the risks. It can make you want to experience every bit of what life has to offer. And we're seeing a little bit of that right now with the younger people who have come through the pandemic. There was a story in the Wall Street Journal just in the last couple of weeks about how Gen Z and some millennials have just said, we don't think that this world is for the long term, and so we're going to spend, we're not going to save. And I think, when we look at somebody who has experienced loss in such a profound way, the thing that you sort of have to do in order to capture your better self is to look at goals, to look at what do you really want? I mean, and that's the question for all of us when it comes to our money, no matter whether we've gone through a significant loss or not. But what are the big things on your list that you want in the short term, in the medium term, and in the long term? And how are you going to get there? How are you going to plot your way there in an achievable manner? Beyond that, the saving, the investing, the actual machinations that we all need to put ourselves through in order to be successful achieving those goals, that's largely just math. But it's taking a step back from the impulsive feelings that you have at the time of a loss, and forcing yourself to really look at them and deal with them. I've often been asked, what do I do if I inherit? What do I do if I get an inheritance? And my answer is always, for the first 6 months to a year, you do nothing. Right? You do absolutely nothing, because there's so many emotions tied up in that money that you are likely to make decisions that you regret.
Kathryn, thank you, Jean. Kathryn, when I was thinking about the recent events, of course, as someone who speaks grief all the time, I know that these events can trigger memories and reflections of our own losses. And also the fear of the safety and security of those who we love most, those who are still here, but now we fear maybe something happening to them. So in that frame, Kathryn, I'm curious for you, what questions do you feel are most important for the readers of How to Money to ask a surviving parent, a grandparent, about their finances? Are they taking care of their own store? How can they get involved and know kind of what's on the horizon in their own family?
It's a great question. In the book, we frame a question around, what do you want for future you? So we ask our readers to think about where they're going to be in 5 years and 10 years. And we don't just give them the abstract concept of saving for retirement, because our readers we know we're going to be younger for this particular book. But we do talk about that your future isn't just some imaginary thing. It's you. You're going there, you're headed there. And in that way, I think it's hopeful, but it's also helpful to make it seem like more of a reality, that this is coming. We know it's coming, and we're going to try to get out ahead of it. So I hope that when people read our book, that maybe some more of those conversations like you're talking about will happen, because these kids are going to be put into the frame of mind to think about their future selves. And I think it's an easy dovetail then to ask your parents about, well, what have you done for your future, and how are you prepared for your future? And we also are trying to spark conversations around college and college savings between kids and their parents who are reading this book. And I think those college conversations, at least for me, those were the payment for college conversation is what opened up all the conversations that I had with my parents about money, because that was the first big expense that our family undertook as a group. I felt like we were on a team. We are playing for the same team here. We have the same goal here. I was told very clearly by my father that your job is college. So you will show up to class every day because college is your job. And I think those conversations are perhaps easier to start when a child is 18 and they start to think about their first big investments.
I agree. I have a child who just graduated college, and so these financial conversations are so important. And I know the team at Her Money had a female audience in mind for this book. But to be honest, I came back from your book signing and I gave it to Jake right away. And it's such an inviting book to read. It's so colorful. The illustrations are so inviting that, he was tearing through it. His light was on. I saw him reading, in this kind of wonderful zone of after college and before he moves from New York down to Pennsylvania. So I appreciate how you're making it so accessible. Before I go ahead and ask Jean my next question, I do want to just take a housekeeping pause just to remind people of how the rest of the conversation is going to work so you can prepare. It is unusual to have Jean Chatzky in the house to answer your most pressing questions. It is unusual to have Kathryn Tuggle available to answer your questions. So in the chat, please put your questions. What Christina will do during the course of our conversation when I go and ask, Jean and Kathryn some more pressing questions that I have. I want you to put your questions in the chat. What Christina will do is then go through them all, decide which questions may be applicable to the most people on this call, and then you will get your questions answered by the best of the best. So we will do that. And even when this conversation is over at the strike of 2 Eastern time, if you come here every month, I am on time. The conversation does not have to end. Her Money Media is on Facebook at Her Money Media, Her Money Media on Instagram, Her Money Media on Twitter. I've already admitted, I've confessed my obsession with their podcast. So I definitely recommend that you download that to your phone. I love those conversations that you have all the time. Love them, love them, love them. So as I continue on my questions, please put your questions in the chat. And then don't worry if we don't get to your question, because at the strike of 2 Eastern time, if you want more, they are always available on social media. So don't worry about it. So Jean, here is my next question for you. What are the money losing mistakes that teens and young adults too often make, and how can we protect them from making them?
I think they fall into a couple of broad categories. Number one is not paying enough attention to their money, and number two is not paying enough attention to their time. So let me sort of dig into each of them. And by the way, I don't think they're limited to teens. I think these are mistakes that people make all along the way. And I know, for example, when I talk about not paying enough attention to their money, one of the programs that we have at Her Money is a coaching program. It's Finance Fix, and it's an 8-week deep dive into your money to get you saving more, spending less, and focused on heading in the right direction. And
wait, hold on, Jean, can people buy that for their kids' graduation gift? That seems like a fabulous gift idea.
Yeah, no, they absolutely can. We're launching new classes every single month, and if you go to Her Money, you can find the link for the Finance Fix program, or you can just go to financefix.com. We spelled it with 2 X's because we were trying to get clever, and so it is what it is. But it's yeah, I think we have had some interest in a program for young people particularly. So if we get enough, we'll probably just fill a class with people that are that age. And these are small group classes where people work together and work one-on-one with the coach. So, but I sort of started there because one of the big things that we do here is get people in touch with their money. Money goes so fast these days because it's so largely invisible, right? We just swipe and swipe and swipe and swipe and Venmo and tap, and I mean, you don't even have to, you just wave your phone and money gets spent. And because of that, we don't know where our money is going. And when we don't know where our money is going and things are moving at a very, very quick velocity, money slips through the cracks. We have a lot of what professionals like to call leakage, and that gets really expensive, particularly for young people who don't have as much in the way of disposable income as their parents do, and are used to living in their parents' homes where the spending is probably more lavish than they can afford on their own. And so you got to get your kids in touch with where their money's going. They have to pay attention. They can do it with an app. They can do it with a program like ours. They can do it with pencil and paper, but they got to follow the money. The second thing that they have to pay attention to is time, and that comes in 2 different varieties. First of all, time is money, right? I mean, you've heard that so many times throughout your life, but once you have a sense of what an hour of your time is actually worth, it gives you a tool that you can use to make decisions about how you want to actually use that time. It's very, very powerful. And my quick hack for figuring out what an hour of your time is worth, which we put in the book, is just to take your salary, your annual salary, if you don't work by the hour, lop off the last 2 zeros and divide by 2. And that is essentially what your hourly rate happens to be. But the other place that we get into trouble with time is by not considering the incredible value of our years when we're young. If we can get ourselves investing in our 20s, that money has so much more time to grow than in our 30s, 40s, 50s, and 60s, and is worth so much more down the line. So we don't want to waste these precious years as we're trying to get our financial lives working well.
Before I go to Kathryn, you mentioned some apps that help with the tracking of spending. And are you comfortable suggesting a few that people can maybe jot down and recommend to those young people in their lives, or even for themselves?
Sure, 100%. Some are free, some are not free. So you want to make sure that you know the difference. In the free bucket, Mint is quite good. And probably the leader in the category, but there are others. If you want to track with a spouse or with a partner, there's an app called Honeyfi. If you are interested in an app that saves money for you, that uses artificial intelligence to look at your checking account and moves money out of checking and into savings when it determines that you have enough to save and you won't overdraw, that's called Digit. It's not free. It's a couple of dollars a month, but I think it's worth it. And then there's a very popular program called You Need a Budget, or YNAB. The Her Money community, despite the fact that it's not free, is a very big fan of YNAB.
Thank you. That's really, really helpful. Kathryn, for those of us who have joined today's conversation, who perhaps are not joining us because they have a young adult in their life, but perhaps they have lost a spouse, or perhaps they are anticipating the loss of a parent. I'm wondering what you think are the best planning ideas, opportunities to get your estate in order. What should people take care of when they are anticipating loss?
It's a great question. I mean, Jean actually could probably speak better to this just because she actually just went through it with her stepfather. And I know, Jean, that you mentioned there was a book that your mom used that they used together to sort of like lay out everything that their heirs would.
I'm laughing because it wasn't a book. It was something that my stepfather made up. But it, you know, by the
So
time
it could be a book.
by the time he was finished making it up, it could have been a book. I think, you know, if you are, so Allison, are we talking about somebody who's preparing for the eventual loss, or somebody who has lost?
In terms of planning for a loss, what do you think is really the most important thing to do as we plan, as we anticipate?
Document. And that means more than just having an estate plan. I think everybody who has people in their lives or assets that they care about, take care about having some say over after they go, needs an estate plan. And that can be as simple as having a will, a durable power of attorney for finance, so that somebody can make financial decisions for you if you're not able to make them for yourself, a healthcare proxy so that somebody can make health related decisions for you if you're not able to make them for yourself, and a living will that tells a doctor or a hospital whether or not you want life sustaining measures, right? That in and of itself is a basic estate plan. It's not hard to get. It's not expensive. You should have one, and you should 100% have one if you're a parent, because having a will is the only place where you can name guardians for minor children. So that's sort of table stakes. Beyond that, what my stepfather did and what I've done and my husband has done on his suggestion is putting together something that he called a letter of instruction and suggestion. And it's basically just a roadmap. Here are the important people. These are the accounts. This is who you call. This is the financial advisor and the attorney and the accountant. These are the passwords, or the key to the password manager. And you put this document together, you update it, you know, once every couple of years, and it can be a real lifesaver. I mean, my stepdad, whose name was Bob, and who, you know, he really laid it out. He laid out everything from who will speak at his funeral to what sort of food he wanted ordered for the Shiva, which, if you're not Jewish, is that when Jewish people die, often there's a Shiva, and it is a period of mourning where people often come to your house and they eat and they drink. And my stepfather really knew what kind of food he wanted for the Shiva, and so that was, you know, he made it easier for us. And when you're grieving, whether it's this is the password to the Verizon account, or this is what I want for my funeral, that helps.
What strikes me about what you're saying, and I'm sorry about Bob.
Thank you.
To me, what strikes me on a very personal level, my mother died a long time ago, right when I graduated college. And she was like a death denier. You know, she was not wanting to admit to herself that she was so sick. And so it was the 11th hour when she was just not of a sound enough mind to write what you're describing. And I feel from what you're saying, it's an act of love what Bob did for his family. Don't you think?
100%. Yeah, 100%. Because, you know, for all the reasons I was saying before, we're not thinking clearly when somebody dies, right? And any help that you can give your loved ones because you've done some pre-planning is, I think, really welcome. And by the way, it doesn't solve all the problems. I mean, it's gosh, it's been several months now, and my mother is still going through, you know, and having to close accounts and deal with tedious things that are, you know, truly annoying and time consuming. But she would have had so much more of that to do had he not put this roadmap in place for us. So yeah, I think it's 100% an act of love. It's incredibly kind. To do something like this for the people that you love. And by the way, if you don't do the basic estate planning, if you don't name the guardians, if you don't put the documents in place that give you the power to determine what happens to your children and your possessions, the state is going to make those calls for you, and they're not necessarily going to do what you wanted done, right? And so there's so many reasons why this is also a you know, it's an act of love, but it's also a real act of financial importance.
Before I pivot to the chat and Christina and our questions, I have to make a personal edit. It's not that my mother, I said it was a demonstration of love, which to me, when I heard myself say it, it made me think out loud that, am I giving the impression that my mother didn't love her family because she was a death denier? I don't think for her it was the case. I think some people, which is why I think this conversation is so important, don't feel comfortable having it. And so I wanted to give my mother a little bit of a pass before I pivoted to Christina. So with that said, and my mother's memory intact, Christina, go ahead.
I did just want to actually add the book
Yeah.
that I was thinking of that I thought Bob had filled out, but perhaps he did his own thing, is called I'm Dead Now What, which you might have talked about on this show before, but it walks you through every single thing that your family might need. Your passwords, your attorney's name, you know, where your will is, if you have a safe deposit box. And it's the kind of thing that you could fill out over time, over the course of a couple of years, whenever you had a minute to just jot some things down. So we've written about it before at hermoney.com, and I've heard good things about it.
Thank you so much. I'm sure Christina will add that to the chat in just a bit when she's done going through these questions, but we're ready for you, Christina.
Okay, the first question is anonymous. It says, I'm a new, relatively young widow, completely unexpected, whose husband took care of finances while I raised our kids. My husband had a deep life insurance policy. How do I know who to trust when looking for a financial planner or wealth manager?
Oh, I hear this all the time. And first of all, I'm so sorry about your husband, and for everybody in this Zoom who's here because you've recently or not so recently experienced loss. You know, our hearts totally go out to you. There's a couple of things. I mean, I think there's a level of basic trust, which you don't want some sort of a charlatan, right? You want to know that this person is licensed, that they are experienced. I like somebody with at least 5 years experience under their belts, that they have not gotten into any trouble with the SEC, which is something, or FINRA, as we call it nowadays, which is something that you can find out by going to finra.org and using what they call their broker check tool. It will let you know if there are any red flags in this person's history. You should also just do a basic Google search, make sure there's nothing out there that looks fishy to you. But then you want to make sure that you are finding somebody who lines up with what you need from a financial planner, who is economically feasible for you, where you understand the model of how they get paid and that makes sense to you, and who is somebody that you can really talk to. And so I have a preference for comprehensive financial advisors. I like to see, sometimes they're called holistic financial advisors. I don't want somebody who's just going to look at your brokerage accounts. I want somebody who's going to look at your whole financial life. And I want them to be a fiduciary, which means that they are required to act in your own best interest, rather than theirs. So if they are if they're sort of toggling between two very similar financial products, one of which costs more and would pay them a higher commission, and one of which costs less and would benefit your pocket, they have to go with the latter. All CFPs, certified financial planners, are fiduciaries. That's an important thing to know. So that's a good credential to look for. You can go through a process where you ask friends and colleagues for recommendations to build a short list of planners, and then you want to sit down with them, get 3 or 4 good recommendations, sit down with them, figure out how they get paid. Are they working on a model where you're going to pay them a fee for their services, or are they going to charge you a percentage of assets that they manage for you? What is their sense of how your money should be invested, and what other recommendations would they make for a person like you? And then, pay very close attention to who's doing the talking and who's doing the listening in this initial conversation. If somebody is talking at you and just telling you about all the good things that they can do for you, then they're not asking you enough questions about your life and your wishes. And so I like you to be doing most of the talking in this initial meeting, if possible. At hermoney.com, we also we have a referral engine if you're looking for a certified financial advisor. So if you go to hermoney.com and you click our Find an Advisor button, we will set you up with a consultation, a free one, of course, with a certified financial planner and a fiduciary.
Wow, that's a lot of really important information. Thank you so much, Christina. Let's keep going.
There's actually one more stat I wanted to share.
Oh,
there.
yes, Kat, I keep cutting you off before.
No, you're fine. So there was a study that came out just a few years ago that 2/3 of women, when their husband passes, they opt to find a new financial planner when they're widowed, because the reasons are varied, right? Perhaps they feel talked down to, or perhaps they feel that the planner was always spoke to their husband and isn't addressing them directly. But I think it speaks to the need to not stop until you find the perfect fit, because your financial planner is going to be someone that you check in with at least annually. And if you walk into that room and they're not making eye contact with you, or they are not making you feel fully heard and understood, you have to move on. I kind of equate it to finding a doctor. You have to find a doctor who wants you to be your own advocate, who listens to you when you complain of pain. And it's the exact same thing with a financial advisor. So go to 12 if you have to. It's most important that you find the right fit.
I love that advice, that sense of agency and taking control when you're reeling from loss is hard. But ultimately, I think it's very healing, because loss, as we know, makes us feel so out of control. So if you can regain a measure of that power, I feel like that in and of itself puts us on a path for us to feel better, and on the path to feeling joy in the memory of our losses instead of just that pain. So thank you, Kathryn, for adding that. Christina, what else do you have?
We have one attendee who lost her mother when she was 12 years old. She's now an adult. She said she had extreme difficulty imagining her future self for at least a decade, and realized absolutely nothing is certain no matter what plans you make. So her question is, could you speak more to the intersection of uncertainty and financial literacy?
Sure. Do you want to start, Kathryn?
Yeah. I think for me, the thing that I see over and over again is that uncertainty leads to inaction. And we know that inaction is really the killer when it comes to investing and planning for the future. So many of us, I think the temptation is to say, I'll save for retirement when I make more money, or I'll get that estate plan, once my kids are in school. And we keep thinking that there'll be another better day to do it. Or we have so many questions, we don't know where to start. So we just decide, I'm just not going to answer any of them, because I know once I dive into the first question, it's going to open up a whole can of worms. So I think that uncertainty can be paralyzing, which is why we always say to start with education, because there are so many more resources out there, particularly for women, than there ever used to be. There are books, there are podcasts, there are websites, there are newsletters you can subscribe to that will walk you through the basics of everything, like step by step how to open an IRA, step by step how to draw down on your 401k to make it in the most advantageous way for you. So I would just say start with education first.
Do you feel, Kathryn, that education is also great to get from your peers? I know the Her Money community has a Facebook group where people can talk and share. For Grief has a community page. So do you feel like that ability to commiserate, to learn, to rant, to be happy, to be sad, to share information back and forth, as opposed to expert to learner, peer to peer, where do you see that support coming into play?
I think you need both, because I think that we have all known friends who have good money advice, but we also kind of know they're not great with it either.
Yeah.
So I think you have to know your source. I love the fact that in communities like our Facebook group, women are bouncing ideas off of each other and showing support and giving solutions that might not have been considered before. So all that is amazing. But I do think at the end of the day, if you're going to create your official plan or your official strategy for your retirement and your long-term health and well-being financially, you have to have that fiduciary in your corner. But I love the idea of getting a recommendation for that fiduciary from a good friend, or talking about, I think just knowing if you've made a mistake, just hearing that someone else has made that mistake can be so empowering, and how they recovered from that mistake. So ideally women would have both in their lives, and I approve people for our Her Money Facebook group. So please request and I'll put you right in.
That's good to know. Christina, let's go with another question.
We have some anonymous widows in the chat that want to know more about specific timelines. So one of the timeline questions is there a time that I should nail down a financial planner after becoming widowed? And the second one is there a guide for widows who need to close and retitle assets and accounts? By when does this need to be done?
I'll take it, because I actually went through this process with my mom after my father died. So before she met and married my stepfather, my mom was interesting in that I was raised by a woman who actually handled the money in the family, which was unusual for that generation. But she was better at it than my father. She liked doing it more than my father, so she handled it for them. But they talked about everything. And when my dad died, she felt like she lost her sounding board, and so we went through a process, and I did it with her, where we made a short list of financial advisors, and then we went and we interviewed them together. And this was probably about 3 to 6 months after my dad died. It was in that window at some point. It was past. she was still in a fog, right? She was still in a fog. But I think the importance of having somebody on your team during that time is that hopefully they can give you some guardrails, so that you are not making, so that you don't make mistakes, so that you don't make decisions that you later regret. And so I think sooner rather than later is probably a good thing to do. As far as the specific retitling of assets and when that has to be done, I honestly don't know off the top of my head, and I don't want to give you wrong information. But I know that your estate planning attorney will know, and likely your accountant will as well.
Kathryn, can I ask you a question that we haven't gotten to yet? And maybe while I'm asking, if anyone has more questions, please throw them in the chat. But one thing that's on my mind, we talked about assets when a loved one dies and potential inheritances. And I think the advice that I heard was sit, wait, make an informed decision. Don't work on those assets. Don't think about them right away, that money. And the reverse, I guess, or the opposite would be debt, right? Like, what do you do with debt and bills and things that you are now perhaps having to navigate as a young adult? If you were a how-to money book reader, what would be the advice of navigating those very kind of choppy waters?
Yeah, I mean, I would say it's twofold. I would say skip ahead to the things that you think are the most urgent. If you know that there are pending debts that kind of supersede all else that are coming due, I would say definitely, prioritize those. The reason for the advice for an inheritance to sit on it is in part what we were talking about with finding that good fit with a fiduciary, because not everybody has that financial planner that is trusted. Like, if you're going to be like the 2/3 of women who transition to a different financial planner when your husband passes, that's going to take time to find that fit. And before you make any moves with your money, you want to be doing it with a trusted advisor. But I think that there's a sliding scale of your to-do list, and certainly pending debts are going to be the more urgent thing for you to take care of.
Can I just jump in for a second?
Of course.
If these are debts of, if you're the child, right, and these are debts of your parents or of your remaining parent, they are not your debts, right? They may be the debt of the estate, and you are going to need to look at whether the estate has the assets to satisfy them, but you don't have to personally satisfy them. So don't go, necessarily down that road without getting your line straight.
That's an important point. I don't think that would be obvious to perhaps most people. So again, going back to your very good point about getting that advice from a trusted expert, I think is really important, because unnecessarily you may think you have to take on those financial burdens, and that could further make someone incredibly vulnerable in their financial health. Would you not agree?
100%. Yeah, 100%. And the laws and the rules are different, right, across the board for different things. But, there are many parents these days, there are many older people these days who have taken on student loan debt that they're carrying forever for their kids, and they're carrying it into their 70s and their 80s. Well, student loan debt dies with the owner of that debt. And so, you don't have to pick up those payments as the child, even if it was for your education. But a mortgage debt is going to have to be satisfied by the estate. And so, or you'll have to sell the house, or you'll have to figure it out. So you got to go line by line and look at things specifically.
I feel like I'm at the doctor's office and I'm learning so much about my health. In this case, it's my financial health. And I see that Kathryn is responding to some questions in the chat. I feel like we're in a telehealth appointment where instead of talking about our, fever and headaches, we're getting a financial fix. We're getting a financial checkup. So I really do appreciate that. Christina, I think we have time for like maybe a lightning round if you have a couple last questions.
One question that came up from Hannah is, do you have any recommendations for easy and affordable online estate planning services or guidelines?
LegalZoom is good, and it's online, and it's affordable, and it's understandable.
That's awesome. Christina, do you have any more, or I have a couple more that we can do lightning round fast?
This one, a few people mentioned that they hired lawyers or financial planners that didn't have the family's best interest in mind. Are there questions that people can ask their financial planners to keep them on track, or how should they handle the aftermath of a bad experience?
I'm going to link her money story on this topic because we actually have a list on our site of every question to ask a financial planner before you work with them. So I'm going to put that in the chat.
Oh, I love it. Okay, so my last question, while Kathryn is putting that into the chat, is for Jean, which is, let's say you've inherited very, very little money, none at all. You are a young person. You're given this incredible book, How to Money. Where do they begin? What is the most important takeaway if you're feeling that you are starting this financial journey really kind of on your own? You're making your own path. This is a great way to begin. It's a great Bible. It's a great resource. But what's your number one tip to the young reader?
I'm going to tell your young reader the same thing that I have told my kids, which is save. I told my kids, because they're a little older than kids who are just coming out today, but I told them save 10% of everything. Eventually you want to get it to 15%. And if you can do that from the time you start working until the time you retire, you're going to be just fine.
I love that. Well, in the last 3 minutes, I'm going to do a roundup of where people can continue the conversation, because I myself, when I participate in Zooms and I have more to say, or we didn't get to your question in the chat, you feel like you've been, that you've signed up and you want to continue the conversation, or maybe you think about something an hour from now, or when you're going to sleep tonight, or when you wake up tomorrow morning and you have a question for Kathryn and Jean. They're accessible. I know they are. I see their work and they have got your financial back. So I'm going to remind you where you can find them. So on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, it is Her Money Media. I know Christina has their personal social accounts that she can put in the chat as well. Do not forget about their podcast. I love it. I'll be listening right along with you. And of course, Reimagine, our friends. Andy, thank you so much for always having us. And Reimagine is on Instagram at Let's Reimagine, on Twitter, Let's_Reimagine. Don't forget the underscore. And on Facebook, it's Reimagine End of Life. And at the top of our show today, we talked about the transition that is underway from Domani for Grief to For Grief. That is underway. It is exciting. Please do check out the social media that we have going on. Check out the new website. It is growing. It is going to get better and better. So join us. The conversation is not over. And again, I was so honored to come to your book launch party, Kathryn and Jean, and best of luck with How to Money. I'm so honored to have spent this hour with you guys.
Thank you, Allison. Thanks so much for having us.
Guys, it's been great.
All right, bye you guys. See you next month.